It really is a pleasure to kick off my first official day at UNL with this marvelous lecture series, and by welcoming all of you to the Hubbard Lecture series, First People of the Plains. This is the third in the series, and it's we're very, very grateful to Dr. Ann Hubbard and to the Claire M. Hubbard Foundation for the generous endowment that provided to the State Museum, which supports this annual lecture. The purpose of the series, which honors Claire Hubbard, Ann's mother, is to advance the understanding and appreciation of the cultural heritage of the First Peoples of the Plains. Anne, would you please stand or wave your hands and receive our gratitude? Now, each year, the Hubbard Lecture Committee selects the program partners and speakers, and this committee consists of many representatives representing several disciplines from across campus. This year's program partners are Vision Maker Media and the UNL Women's Center. I'd now like to introduce Jan Deeds, Director of the UNL Women's Center and Associate Director in Student Involvement and Gender Programs. Please help welcome Jan to the mic.
Thank you very much. When I was in high school in the 70s, I didn't learn about anything that women or people of color did. That was not part of our story. And so when I came to college and were meeting people who were doing things and were involved in, and I was reading stories from women and people of color, I was furious and excited that I had this opportunity to expand my knowledge. So as an older person now, as a director of the Women's Center, I've been very happy for the last few years to have a partnership with Vision Maker Media to bring documentaries that bring women's voices, and especially Native women's voices, to our campus and to the youth that are here and to everybody who's here. So I'm really happy to have this opportunity. I'm excited to see the product that we're going to see some things of today, and I hope to continue our conversations forever. So thank you very much.
Thank you for those comments. We are very excited that this year's Hubbard Lecture features a forthcoming documentary sponsored by Vision Maker Media. Based at UNL, Vision Maker Media shares Native stories with the world that represents the cultures, experiences, and values of American Indians and Alaska Natives. They receive their funding from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and offer students internships and fellowships, thereby encouraging young people to learn about careers in media and become the next generation of storytellers. It's now my honor to introduce to you the Executive Director of Vision Maker Media, Shirley Snavy. This director has a little work to do here.
Thank you, Susan, and welcome to Nebraska. I see you're already acculturated with your red on. That's very good. I'd like to call our panelists up to the table, and we'll get started. Vision Maker Media has been around for almost 40 years. It's hard to believe. During that time, we've presented probably about 300 documentaries to PBS stations around the country. And we're so proud to partner with these women, these warrior women, in the creation of this documentary film. We do get our funding from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and this film will be on PBS next year. We hope. So I'm going to introduce the ladies at the table, and then we are going to show some clips, and in between each clip, we're going to talk about the clips and what you've been seeing. So first, Dr. Elizabeth Castle is right next to me, and she brings 15 years of experience as a scholar, activist, and oral historian, working in collaboration with indigenous communities. While completing her PhD at Cambridge University, Castle worked as a policy associate for President Clinton's Initiative on Race. Her dissertation on the history of women's activism in the Black Panther Party and the American Indian movement qualified Castle for the UC President's postdoc fellowship, where she worked under the mentorship of Professor Bettina Aptheker and Angela Y. Davis. For the last 8 years, Castle was a Native Studies professor at the University of South Dakota, just up the road. And her new book explores the full history of Native women's activism in the Red Power movement. It's under contract with the University of Nebraska Press. Next, we have Christina King. Okay. Christina King is Creek and Seminole from Oklahoma, but now she lives in New York City. She's a producer and filmmaker whose work spans commercial, documentary, film, television, with a focus on human rights issues, civic engagement through storytelling, and democratizing filmmaker opportunities for minority voices. Her recent documentary, Up Heartbreak Hill, was funded by Vision Maker Media and was part of the POV series. And then in Sundance 2014, her film that she produced, This May Be the Last Time, explores the origins of the Muskogee worship songs in Oklahoma, and it's a stunning film. In 2014, King became a Time Warner Native Producing Fellow through the Sundance Institute, and she's also a fellow with Firelight Media. Welcome. And next we have Madonna Thunderhawk, who I've had the pleasure of knowing just about, I don't know, I'm not even going to say how many years, but it's so great to see you. She's a veteran of every modern American Indian struggle, from the 1969 occupation of Alcatraz to the 1973 Stand at Wounded Knee. In 1974, she established the We Will Remember Survival School, an alternative school and group home for Indian youth who had been pushed out of the local school system in Rapid City. Thunderhawk co-founded the Women of All Red Nation and the Black Hills Alliance in the late 70s to work on issues for Indigenous women and to protect the sacred land from uranium mining, sacred Lakota land. Thunderhawk is a longtime community organizer with a range of experience in the American Indian treaty rights protection, cultural preservation, economic development, and environmental justice. At age 75, I can't believe it. She still continues to travel across the state of South Dakota and the 9 reservations, working as a tribal liaison for the Lakota People's Law Project to stop the state's trafficking of Native children. Her role is on the very grassroots level, working to increase the tribe's capacity to develop their own foster care systems. She has also organized a grandmother's group of elders who seek to heal communities by helping younger generations to understand traditional cultural kinship roles. Thank you for coming, Madonna. And joining us is Madonna's daughter, Marcy Gilbert, and she has a master's degree in nutrition from South Dakota State University. Yay, go Jacks. That's where I went to school. And she is now a community development field specialist for South Dakota State University Extension. And Marcy works with Native communities and youth in providing education and awareness of the importance of physical activity and the reintroduction of Native foods to maintain health and fight diabetes. Gilbert's formative years were influenced by the activism of her extended family's leadership in the American Indian movement. She was a 17-year-old delegate to the newly established International Indian Treaty Council to Geneva in 1977, and she's a graduate of the We Will Remember Survival School. Her goal is to reinforce sustainable traditional foods and organic farming to her reservation as an expression of the most fundamental form of survival and empowerment. And Marcy's also a graduate of the University of Nebraska here in Lincoln, and so it's been fun going around and reminiscing with Jan Deeds and other about those good old days. So welcome back to Lincoln, Marcy. And we're just going to start. Beth is going to talk to us about the making of the film. So why did you make this movie?
Well, thank you for that question, Shirley. Yeah, thank you everybody for coming. This is really amazing looking up at all of you. The simple answer as to why we made this film is that the world needs to know this story, this history, and by experiencing it, they will be transformed in some way by that knowledge. That's what happened to me 17 years ago when I first went all the way to Swiftbird on the Cheyenne River Sioux Reservation and sat down to interview and talk with Madonna Thunderhawk. At that time, I was conducting oral histories for my PhD, and I was totally hooked. I had to know these stories and be able to record them in a way that they would go beyond me and be understood by the outside world. That's where this project began, and it's grown into a collection of filmed oral history interviews that includes most of the women who were activists in the Red Power movement of the 1970s. If there's one thing you take away from this event, is that every woman's story is important. The sacrifices and courage it took to stand up and fight for Indigenous rights in very difficult spaces, to fight for the fundamental human right to exist as Native peoples and not be subject to cultural genocide that's deeply embedded. I knew I was cultural genocide, it sparked. I'm saying it again, genocide. Told you I'd get it in there. That is so deeply embedded in the American experience. So the full history that I've been working on includes the struggle from the Pacific Northwest, where women fought for the treaty-protected right to fish, the occupation of Alcatraz Island, the establishment of the American Indian movement in '68 in Minneapolis, and can you guys hear me? And how that spread across the country, and of course moving into Wounded Knee. And one of the things that our film and the project and the book all talks about is this period after Wounded Knee. So while everyone's story is important, not everyone's story can be told through film. While struggling under the challenge of including as many voices as possible, we realized that Madonna Thunderhawk's personal history simply places her in proximity to every major event and group of people who were important in the Red Power movement. In fact, while the '73 occupation of Wounded Knee is often considered the watershed event of Red Power, much of the truly transformative work by grassroots activists, especially women, occurred afterwards, again, between this period of '74 and 1980. During this time, there was the establishment of the survival schools, which we'll talk about this evening, the struggle against the reign of terror violence on Pine Ridge Reservation. Are you guys able to hear me? Okay, it's dropping out, so I wanted to make sure. The founding of the group Women of All Red Nations, the development of an international indigenous agenda at the United Nations in Geneva, the Black Hills International Survival Gathering, bringing together environmental and Native groups to work in solidarity, a very important word, to stop corporate uranium mining in the Black Hills. Madonna was a central player in every one of these events. Therefore, she can be a lens through which we look at the larger history. Even more important, though, is that, and this is the thing that happens all the time, she hasn't retired. She's not coming out of retirement. She has never stopped. And that often gets overlooked, and we don't want to put her in the historic relic category because that is not where she is. And in that fact, the thing she probably dislikes most is being the center of attention, whether it's historical or contemporary, but she realizes how important it is for this story to be told, and she's willing to do that, and we really appreciate it. And since I have never made a film, and I wanted to, I reached out to Vision Maker, and they were our first supporter and funder, and through them, I met Christina King.
That's me. So, yeah, Beth and I met, and I was making another film at the time, and she, was really, really excited and told me all of these things about all these amazing women that she had footage of from the American Indian movement, and she told me about this amazing woman, Madonna Thunderhawk, and how tirelessly she worked from a space of very grassroots, community-oriented work, and she stayed in that, which is, you may or may not know, is very, very rare. So she said all kinds of amazing things about her, and I said, well, there are a lot of really interesting, charming people that are great, but you maybe can't make a movie about them. Like maybe they're not good on camera, or, there are just a lot of factors going into that. Otherwise, everybody's like awesome, interesting, like uncle would have a movie made about them. It just doesn't work like that. So I went, after spending some time working together, because that was the other thing when Beth approached me. Being a native filmmaker, I have a lot of people approach me with ideas, and it usually starts with, I'd really like to shoot this thing on Pine Ridge. And I'm like, of course you do. Everything's there. And I usually, I try to be careful, because sometimes people just want an Indian for hire, where they just kind of want you to try to attract monies and to attract cachet and talk all the brown people into signing things, and then they're just like, okay, you can move on now. And that's really insulting, and I'm just as good of a producer as I am an Indian. And it's also, it feels really horrible, like it's soul crushing. So anyway, because of those who had come before her, when I met Beth, I was kind of like, well, this sounds really great. You've done a lot of really cool work, but like, what's your deal? Like, can I trust you to like get me down? So we had this period of just like, how down are you kind of thing going on. And she's very down. So we're here today. So after we got through that whole like, side-eyeing each other thing for a while, I thought, well, let's go to Rapid City. Let me meet all these people like in person, because like on paper all this stuff sounds amazing, and let's do like some exploratory shooting. And it was the Rapid City powwow, if I remember correctly, and I just came out and we had no agenda other than just I wanted to shoot and kind of see like who kind of popped on camera, who kind of maybe didn't translate so well, what everybody's dynamic was, who did Madonna interact with the most, who did Marcy interact with the most, and I was keeping an eye on all kinds of possibilities. And so we filmed absolutely all day at the powwow, and there were a lot of like really specific moments, like there was an honoring for Madonna at that particular powwow, and that was like a big kind of like, that establishes her as like somebody who's respected in the community, all of that. Forget it. The amazing piece that came out of that whole weekend of filming was this moment where, I think it was in like late in day 2, and they were sitting up in the bleachers. They just finished dancing, or were maybe waiting to dance, and they were sitting up in the bleachers I forget where it's held. It's held indoors at that time of year. And I was, at the Civic Center, and I was filming them basically kind of like this from the side, and I was kind of far away from them, and they were just sort of in their own world. And they said something, and you'll see this if you ever hang out with them that much, but so they somehow got each other tickled, and like the most epic, like when they laugh, like they both just like threw their head back, and it's a 2-part thing. It's like a right hand cracking up and then like a left hand smacking of the knee, but they both did it in tandem at the same time, and I was feeling and I was just like, I couldn't, of all the amazing things I had filmed that day, and there were a lot of very moving things because people were honoring Madonna, that was the thing where I was like, no matter how much you individuate from your parents, there's that thing that you can never shake from each other. And it really got me interested in like what their journey together was. And I thought, this is a mother-daughter story. Like, this isn't, I felt like that very, very strongly, that was the way into the history in like a really personal way that wasn't just, a historical document. And that's very, very important for me because the first films I worked on, the only opportunities I had was to work on PBS historical documents, which I was very, very proud to work on, and I was very excited about those. But if that's all we're seeing, then it keeps perpetuating this idea that we've done all we're going to do, and then we're gone. So I'm always trying to put representations of modern Native life on, and this was a way to do both because Madonna never stopped, like Beth said. So I started wanting to look at the ways in which they're connected, and wanted to use that mother-daughter relationship as a way to not only get into history, but to really see what being a mother-daughter team means for the dynamics of both change because if we're not doing it with each other and with community and with our family, we're not going to make change. But at the same time, that puts a lot of pressure on the family dynamic. So, you know, it's tough on the family that you're actually trying to save the world for. So anyway, so that's kind of how the film sort of started taking shape, you know, and then slowly we started working with Madonna, who started granting us more and more access, all the while being not the kind of person who wants to be filmed. But the number one thing I learned like early on is that whoever you're filming in anything, you showing up filming should never be the most important thing that person has going on that day. Because if it is, then this person just needs to go apply to be on The Amazing Race. And they're too absorbed, and there's really nothing interesting there. And I can guarantee you, we were definitely never the most important thing that was happening to Madonna every day as she's
How many
fighting
times did she ditch us?
You could never get mad at how many times she ditched us, because she was going to like save foster children. Like she was always doing something. But anyway, I guess should we go to the work into the clip? So yeah, we'd love to start sharing some of the movie with you. So I'll just set it up a little bit. All of these clips, this is actually the very first public screening of any of this footage whatsoever, and lots of people have bugged us from coast to coast about it. So this is really, really, really special. But along with that comes responsibilities. And that means we beg of you to take note that because the film isn't completely finished, there's no sound mix, so the sound's not going to sound, you know, really stellar, and it's not color corrected. There's just a lot of finishing glossy touches that like you won't actually see in this, but the content is there. So just with that caveat, this first clip that we're going to show, just to set it up, in the 1950s, you know, dams were built all along the Missouri River, and nearly every one of those fell on an Indian reservation, and one of those was on Madonna's res, and that effectively flooded out, you know, where Madonna grew up as a child. It completely flooded out her homeland, and that's where this clip picks up.
When I left, after I graduated from high school, I never went back in that area until about, we had a reunion, remember?
Yeah.
The late 80s, they had a reunion of the old Shine Agency boarding school and any people that had lived down there.
Remember when we were going down in the bus? We're all singing and laughing and laughing and carrying on. And then we didn't even realize that we got more quiet and more quiet the closer we got to the site. You know, it was all underwater, but that's where we were going. Everybody got just quiet.
She comes from the old agency on Cheyenne River that's flooded, so she can never really go home. So when the movement started, she felt like she had somewhere where she belonged. So I think that's why she's dedicated her life, because she can't really go home.
So that clip, you know, what I find really interesting in that clip, just from like a filmmaking perspective, because, you know, we're here to kind of talk about Indigenous women, you know, behind the camera and in front of the camera. As a filmmaker, you have a tremendous pressure to maintain ethics that you really can stand behind, and there's a lot of pressure from funders, from outside audiences, and then really at some point just the creative panic of like, do I have a story, do I have a story, to kind of manhandle the narrative and try to fit things in and say like, this would be really great if this can be interpreted that way. And as a filmmaker, the easiest thing to do is to actually get any number of sound bites that you can use to create whatever the heck you want. That's easy. The hard part is actually getting reality, and I don't mean reality, but I mean real life as people have experienced it. So early on in filming and early on in production, I felt that there may have been this kind of connection between the flood and some years that Madonna had expressed, to Beth in oral histories as years where she kind of had anger but didn't really know where to direct that. And then finding the American Indian movement, thought maybe there was something there, but nobody had ever said anything to me like that, and I didn't want to try to plant that, because that's just not how I do things. So I think 2.5 years into filming, Marcy said that, and I was just like, yes, yes. And the relief wasn't so much yeah, I got them. The relief was yes, I can trust my instincts. I was listening. And that's the thing, is that's the best you can do, is just gut check yourself all the time. And I was I was listening, and I felt more confident that I wasn't going to misrepresent, inadvertently misrepresent something or put something on their narrative that I really wanted it to be, and that was that was just a really major moment that, but you have to do those gut checks. They're pretty vital. So, given the content of that clip, Madonna, I just kind of wanted to ask you, what did that whole event spark for you?
Well, at the time, of course, I was young, and I had a lot of anger, but I couldn't articulate all of that. I was just, I was just kind of I guess, mad at the world. And so the federal government at that time had the relocation program, where many of our people all over the country, Native people from reservations, were going on a relocation program to cities across the country. And I don't know, I guess they thought we were going to all become part of the great melting pot. So it was just, I wanted to just get away, because, where I grew up was gone, So when I got out into the rest of the country and saw what was going on, basically the rest of the country by that time was slowly, the civil rights movement was gaining ground in the 60s and the late 60s. So I got to see what the rest of the people were doing, especially the black people. The Black Panther Party was getting started. And the farm workers, the Mexican American people, and the Filipino people on the West Coast mainly. And the young white people in the country were basically saying, to the war, hell no, we won't go, And to me, that was just amazing what was going on. And then I started looking at all the things that I had grown up with and just took for granted that, well, this is the way it is. I realized what our people had gone through and what we were still going through. So I guess with all the anger I had, because what happened to our land, the land loss, all this, and then for the national interest of the rest of the country, we're still losing land. It didn't all happen in the 1800s. I was really angry, and I was ready for the Red Power movement.
One of the women that you saw in the documentary is here in the little clip that was in the room is Mabel Ann Eaglehunter, sitting in the front row here, and that's Madonna's sister and partner in crime. Marcy.
Yes.
So how you're back home? You're back home in Eagle Butte, and I'm from the Rosebud Reservation in South Dakota, and I've lived all over South Dakota, and that damming of the river was just so politically crappy, It's just ridiculous. And I would imagine that it's really shaped the way things are for you today on that reservation.
Oh yeah, definitely. There's for the younger ones, we have to remember to recognize those who are still here, but give them the opportunity to, like they were talking about when they got on that bus and went down, and that's important, very important history, because our young people, that's stuff that isn't taught in our Indian schools. Our own history isn't being taught in our Indian schools on reservations. Not this, to this extent where it affects us personally, and who are these people in your community who don't have a home now. And so thinking about that, how does that, I don't know what that would feel like, because my home is after that. On my father's side, they have a home down by Swiftburg. I mean, they were part of that, but they moved up. And like she said, a lot of people moved up, but it was like, she said, my mother would say, it was like moving to the surface of the moon. It wasn't the same. And so, but that's where I remember, so I think it's a very important part of history that we need to get into our schools that are on Indian land.
And the other part of that, of course, is that bottom river land that they flooded was the best agricultural land on the reservation. Yeah. Mm-hmm. What an amazing loss. Mm-hmm. And one of the other things, talking about natural resources, is uranium. And uranium is still playing a big role in what's happening in South Dakota and on the border in North Dakota as well. So that's your setup, Beth.
I was like, she's talking about uranium. We're not done yet. So before uranium.
Oh, did I skip a page?
There's just one thing that I wanted to add from the perspective of someone who's had the privilege of sitting down with so many women and talking with them about their histories. It didn't take long to understand that every woman who lived in land that was connected to the Missouri River, who was flooded, whether it was Standing Rock or further down, all of them cite that as the hole in their heart, that was also filled with rage, and figuring out how to channel that not into yourself, which is the challenge. And also just, from the Native Studies professor perspective, I have a very adversarial relationship with my microphone. So, so it's just the fact that often, sacred spaces for Native people where you need to be able to access that land to meet your obligations, right? You need it to heal, you need it to be healthy. It's not an abstract idea. It's not a new age idea. It's part of the need. And so it's one thing when the land is stolen and it's just not yours because someone else has purchased it or colonized it in whatever way. But it's another thing when it is erased, when you can no longer go to it and it's flooded. There's something remarkably painful about that. And so, as a historian, these are all such important interventions into the narrative, if you will, that that's part of what this project does, is bring about a Native women's perspective into the history. So I just wanted to add that and see if Ms. King, do you have any comment?
On that in particular?
Not on what I just said, but on the clip.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh. Well, yeah, I mean, I kind of threw in my filmmaking perspective.
That's fine. We don't. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Just didn't want to roll over you before going to the next clip. Okay. So, uranium mining. Back to the point. This next clip, it doesn't need too much setup. More than the fact, I already gave you a lot of details in the introduction, but after Wounded Knee, between 74 and 80, it was just, everything was happening at the same time. And there was so much going on, and there were many organizations. The Black Hills Alliance, one, and the Women of All Red Nations, another. Madonna was involved in both. And these groups were working with non-native environmental organizations together in solidarity to fight the uranium mining in the Black Hills. And that is part of what this clip addresses. So if we could play the second clip, and then we'll come back and talk about it.
There is uranium in the Black Hills of South Dakota. Industrialists say it is valuable. Environmentalists and some residents say it is dangerous.
Union Carbide was planning on exploratory drilling for possible uranium mining. Well, that just, right away, that got everybody's attention.
It's not going to be so nice in the future when the rest of the effects of the radiation come home.
We, Warren, Women of All Red Nations, we were involved in stopping the uranium mining. Mother Butler, remember that meeting we had in the first one? Yeah, a lot of the issues, but one of them was the water rights.
When Warren did we found the radiation and the water study and all the spontaneous abortions, I mean, we knew that stuff. And I was even living proof because me and 3 other of our friends on the res got pregnant at the same time. 2 of them had spontaneous abortions. The other one had severe birth defects, and TSD was born normal because we had separate water.
This is an issue that we were going to have to fight. There were other groups that got involved, and environmentalists in the area, but also third-generation ranchers, cowboys and Indians formed the alliance. It's the first one in the history of South Dakota.
So there is so much to talk about in that clip, and I'll just make a few points and then toss it over to other folks. But one of the big issues is that we keep not learning from the lessons of our past and not learning from our elders. The reason we wanted to make a film is so that we'd be passing on these historical lessons, and as you can see from this clip, it might remind you of something that's going on now, which is the fight against the KXL pipeline. And that, in the news media, you can see people going, and for the first time ever, cowboys and Indians are coming together, and they're very proud of themselves. It's just they don't know the history. And that history has gone on for quite some time, and back in the 70s, they really knew what it meant to work in solidarity. And that is something that, Madonna has said to me so many times, and I think it's one of the things that has been lost in struggle since the 70s. And I was wondering, Madonna, if you wanted to talk to us about solidarity and anything that clip brings up.
Well, I think keeping in mind back in those days, we were, all of this, the things we were doing, everything was all new to us, standing up and fighting for your rights. I mean, that was something new. Basically, we were all rookies, We just, but one of the things that happened was, as a result of Wounded Knee especially, was that the Red Power movement, specifically the American Indian movement, we were known internationally by then. But we also learned that in those days, what the press, which was just what we call the straight press, and there wasn't any other alternative press sources at all, what they decided to make us out to look like, and but the issues were still there. And that was one thing we learned, that we had all this support worldwide. And after Wounded Knee especially, I traveled a lot, not only in the United States, but the movement, I mean, they just kind of helped me get a passport and said, you're going. you're going here, you're going there, and we need bond money. We got 380 some people indicted by the federal government on criminal charges, which is today would be called civil disobedience. So I was like, you know, how they say throw somebody in the water and tell them to learn how to swim. That's what happened to me. You know, there was times when I had like 20 cents in my pocket and I was sitting in the airport in France, you know, waiting for someone to pick me up, you know, and I'd get in a car and go to a meeting and meet all these people and then go, you know, and talk and then come back and sleep and then go back to the airport. So yeah, I traveled the world over, but I didn't see much but airports and things, you know, but I learned solidarity. I learned what that meant, and that for survival on whatever level, that we would have to do as the modern day Indian people, that it was up to us to ensure our own survival, and we had to do whatever we had to do, and solidarity was one of them. So, and that's what's going on today, you know. There's indigenous struggles all over this planet, you know. And we understand that now. The strength is with solidarity.
Could you tell us what you experienced when you went to Ireland? A little bit about that trip.
Oh, yeah. Well, that was
And when?
that was in the
76.
Late 70s, I guess. Anyway, mid 70s. Anyway, yeah. Well, actually, it was a kind of a trip to several countries in Europe. But as it happened, the original ones that were scheduled to go, of course, were all men. For some reason, they couldn't go, and you know. So, like, I was like maybe third or fourth down the line, you know. But I had the survival school going, you know, the women of all red nations. I mean, we were busy, you know. Time to be going on, you know, these month-long excursions here and there, you know. But so then they sat me down and said, we've got to get, these are people that are in solidarity with us. You know, these are our allies and different things, and that's when we were steady trying to get the international work going. So there's all kinds of reasons why. So I went, and so I was in England for a while, and then, you know, made my rounds there, and then I ended up in Northern Ireland. And by that time this was like maybe about a month and a half. By that time I was, you know, I'd had it. I wanted to go home, and I thought. And there was international stuff going on too, that when I was in Northern Ireland, there had been a lot of, you know, armed confrontations with the IRA, but there was also the political arm of the Republican movement was the Sinn Féin, and they were the ones that had sponsored and set up this tour. So I was, you know, pretty burnt out by then, and because of the things that were going on in world politics and stuff, I was getting worried. I thought, wait a minute, what if I can't go home? What if all of a sudden I get to the airport and they pull my passport or something, or pull me aside? Who's going to know? What could happen? And with the Indian people, at least I know from my part of the country, is the first thing that came to my mind was, what if I die over here? I can't be buried over here. You know, that was the first thing that came. I thought, my God, you know, I got to get home. So, because that's still really important to us, you know, your homeland is where you belong, you know, this world or the next. So anyway, this young, feisty young woman, I wished I could remember her name, but she was this little tiny woman, and she had her bright red hair, and I guess she looked at her and said she's Irish, you know. And she came in the room and she looked at me and she said, "What's the matter?" You know, and I looked at her and I said, I want to go home. And she said, "Home? You can't go home. You've gotten," and she just went boom, 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 boom. She said, Now get yourself together and you get over here. See, this isn't just you, this is for your people, and this is, and she went on, and I went, whoa, you know? So I said, give me my coat. So arm in arm, we went out, you know. But it was really an eye-opener for me, because they took me to this big hall. It was big, like a big meeting room, but there was no tables or chairs or benches or anything. It was just this big empty hall, and there was a stage. And she told me, she said, there's workers that are going to come, and they want to hear you talk and tell you. Just tell what happened and what you want them to know, you know, for the solidarity type, you know, talk. So I said, okay. But at the same time, I was thinking, oh man, I wonder how long I have to talk, and I want, you know, I wasn't really into it. But all of a sudden, there were several doors in the back, and they opened, and people started coming in. And they were all men, and they had just come out of the coal mines. And they all had the coal dust on their faces. You could tell where they had the goggles, they put them up like that. They had those metal lunch pails, and they all came walking, but there was the front part of the building was where they were Republican clubs, they called them, and that's where they drank the brown beer they get, and they all started coming in, walking into this huge room, and they all had a glass like that, and they were all walking in, and I was just checking them out, and I thought, what, they just came out of the mines. I mean, they just got off work, and I thought, and they're drinking booze? I thought, what's this gonna be, you know? What's gonna happen here, you know? And I thought, you know, if I start talking about what, you know, happened in Wounded Knee and things like that, are they gonna get rowdy, or what's gonna go on here, you know? So I was just watching them, and as they came in the door, you could hear them talking in the background, but as they came in, they just kept coming more and more, and pretty soon they were packed in that room, and you could hear a pin drop. And that's what the first thing that got to me. I thought, these aren't just drunken workers like would be in America, you know? These guys are real workers, you know? And they came and they wanted to hear, and I thought, how you know, what kind of a day did they have working in the mines? And there was no place to sit. They're standing in here, and they're quiet, and they're all looking up, looking at me. So I just started telling them, you know, who I was and what I had, you know, was involved in, and what I had seen, and what was going on. And it was just, to me, I thought, this is their history too. That's why they're quiet. That's why they're still here, and they're still standing. After working all day in the mines, they're still standing here listening to me, being respectful. And I thought, because they understand with their history of struggle that the Irish have gone through. Because when I got to Ireland, I was told, you know, the history that I didn't know of that country, and what happened to the people, and how they were forbidden by law to even own land in their own country. The Irish couldn't be landowners, those kinds of things. So I thought, these people understand what I'm talking about. So again, that just widened my whole perspective of solidarity and what goes on, not just with us, but we have allies everywhere.
Yeah, I think that in the course, in the course of making this film, it's been really, really interesting, because as a director, you're supposed to have some control of the ship, sometimes. And in making this film, there's just so much that I have learned from Madonna that it's just a much more collaborative process than other films I've made. And one of the things she speaks to right now was such a big takeaway for me in doing filming with both Marcy and Madonna, with work they're doing with the United Nations. You know, it became clear to me, and through that filming, that actually, you know, there's, as she just mentioned, there's a lot of similarities between indigenous struggles all over the world. And there are a lot of similarities to things that we're dealing with today and have dealt with in the past. And that today, as of right now, if you were to add up all of the indigenous populations in the various areas of the world, if you added that number up together, we're second only in population to India. And that's power. So more working together, more cross-culture exchange, more like, you know, intertribal exchange, I think is really, really important. So this film has been really interesting because we've come at it wanting to make a certain thing, but you know, Madonna's just always at the forefront of the next thing that needs to happen. We're always like, we should just keep shooting this forever and ever, and then Shirley's like, no, you're not. So, but
That's exactly right.
but yeah.
And in our visits, Marcy, yesterday, and learning about your work, this is a new kind of activism and a new kind of oppression from the federal government as far as our food supply is concerned. And I wonder if you want to talk just a little bit about the challenges that you face in nutrition on the Cheyenne River Reservation.
On my res specifically, through different surveys that were done on the reservation, one of the things we learned was that there was a large population that still hunts and gathers. And working for extension, my thing is, my directive is get these people gardening and producing their own food. And then this survey comes out, and there's a large population that still hunt and gather, and their main foods are deer, chokecherries, and prairie turnip. And the percentage that wants to garden is like 17% or some, maybe even less. And so I was like, okay, so what am I doing? Interest isn't there. It's among the elderly, but the other part of it is our land isn't conducive to gardening. It's rangeland. So I am focusing on traditional foods, our native foods. And one of the things that I have to, even among people who are educated and have knowledge about these foods, we still have to overcome the colonized thinking. Because part of that is, well, where did you learn that? What study are you talking about? And other than the obvious study on Indian people, the obvious anthropologists and that kind of thing, but for nutrition, we have to believe and know our own truth, and know and be vocal about that and believe in that. And so for me, it's like, just because some non-Indian person or whoever didn't do this study doesn't mean it's not true. We know this. It's genetic knowledge for us. And so I have to teach that part of it. And then I could get into the nutrition. Like I said, one of the foods is chokecherries, and it's very, very high in antioxidants. And fiber, and there's all kinds of stuff but our bodies react to that very, very positively because we're genetically related. And you look at the history of our traditional foods, it's in our creation history, it's in our ceremonies, it's in our healing. So it isn't just the food that we grew up with, it's all within who we are. So getting that knowledge back and bringing back the value among my own people. And because of the technology age that we live in, young people are so bombarded with this and screens around them and in their ears and so much of that they become removed from the simple life of being indigenous. And I don't mean simple What I mean is indigenous life, being related to the earth and knowing who we are as people from this land. And so among our people, our children, our young people, they don't care about our traditional foods. 15 years ago, I did a taste test of kids between the ages of 8 and 14. And most of them were looking at our foods and like, oh, what is that? You know, and I was eating it and they're like, oh, what are you eating? You know, like that. And I was like, this is our food. What kind of Indian are you? This is our food. You know? And so when you talk to them like that, then they're like, oh, well, no one told me. You know? So, but that was 15 years ago. And now it's still the same. I mean, I do presentations like this in high schools, in the high school in Eagle Butte, and I asked them, how many of you still gather? And how many of you know what Timsila is? And how many of you know what Champa is? You know, like that. And 1 or 2 are in the back. You know, how many of you hunt? 1 or 2, you know? So if I mean, it's one thing to learn where we come from and where our history is, but if we want to survive and move forward, we have to take our foods along with us. We have to. Because our people, and everybody knows that, you know, our people suffer from obesity and leads to diabetes and heart disease and blah, 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 blah. But the rest of the country's like that now. Everybody's Indian in that term. We're all suffering from this crappy diet in this country. The food that we're forced to eat, or that we're choosing to eat now, is killing us. We see it every day. The stats are out there. We're the fattest country in the world. I wonder why. You know, let's get serious about it. And I tell my people, make a decision. Decide to live or decide to die. Because that's our choices by what we put in our mouth every single day. I mean, it's down to that now. It is, you know, it's another thing we have to worry about. You know, we're protecting our lands and we're regaining our knowledge, our language, and the another thing we have to do is reclaim our spirituality, because everybody and their dogs, us, you know, everybody's burning sage now and everybody's, you know, giving out feathers, and you know, we have to reclaim that. That's our spirituality. You know, that's part of who we are deep inside. And now we have to be aware of what we're putting in our mouths every single day. So there's, you know, it's a lot of work and it's a lot of education, but it's a passion of mine.
Speaking of education, the script says you need to introduce the next clip.
Okay. So my mother mentioned it, the survival school. This clip is that we're gonna show the We Will Remember Survival Group. It was a result of the criminalization of being a radical Indian or militant. In '74, my mother started a survival school, and so this clip is about all of us who were in that survival school, and so we'll just watch it.
Are we all here? Looks like we're missing some. Where did Maggie go? Ah, they're jive anyway, otherwise they'd be here, right? Right. Okay, let's go.
One thing that Philip, my son, said was, I don't want to go to school. We should have our own school. And then I thought, well, yeah, I'm not going to put my kids in this school system anywhere. You know, I didn't trust them. And so then started out for my kids and my nieces and nephews. And then it just mushroomed on us. Pretty soon we just had all these kids coming to our door.
Our school is, well, I don't even know if you could call it a school. We all live and work together. in Rapid City. Many of our students are children that have dropped out of the present education system. Not only dropped out, but have been forced out due to the language barriers and the cultural barriers.
I remember waking up and looking around and thinking, what do people think? Because there's bodies everywhere.
Oh yeah, in the yard.
You know, in the yard and under the trailer, and because there's like 40 kids with a 2-bedroom, And that's how we slept. Remember, we had little groups instead of second grade, third grader. I think we had the Hochschila Shapa gang, the Dirty Bum gang,
The Sovereignty Sisters.
The Sovereignty Sisters.
Oh yes, the Sovereignty Sisters.
We were constantly braiding hair.
And Travis's hair only grew this long, but he'd get in line. And then we'd ask him, do you
behind
want...
the ears, over the ears, one braid, tight, up high.
He'd sit down and go, I want 2 long, thick, black braids. And I was so happy just to be able to be with her and be, you know, to be part of all this stuff that she was doing.
You folks always seem to be traveling around.
Last year we went all over. Last year we went through California and down into Arizona and to Farmington. We went to Mexico, Seattle, Oregon, and we visited different reservations.
Went and visited other tribal people who were having their own struggles. That was our classroom. We went to ceremonies and sweats and went to the Wounded Knee trials, you know, being involved in the issues of... When I was introducing this clip, I talked about the criminalization of our lives as Indian people involved in the movement. In Rapid City, if you had long hair, you were automatically considered AIM. And so people were harassed and jailed and watched and all that. But this was after the Wounded Knee, and there was a lot of trials going on. So a lot of people were in jail, sometimes both parents. And so where were the kids going to be? You know, their grandmothers or extended family might be living on the res, and they're the only ones in Rapids, so they would come to the AIM house. And so when that was my cousin talking about having 40 kids at you know, they just started showing up because they knew it was a safe place. And then once we started getting involved, like when she talks about these international trips and stuff, our role was answering all the international mail, because there was piles of it. And she was like, we need to answer these letters. And then she looked at you know, us 15, 20 kids sitting there going, hey, okay, you guys, come on, this is what you're doing. You know? So we became pen pals with people in Germany and Italy, you know, Ireland and wherever else. But the survival school, it was mobile, and it was a opportunity to empower young people, because once we learned who we are and what our rights are as Indian people, then we knew we belonged here, and we knew it was okay to be here. In the white schools, they were, you know, invisible, and to some extent we still are. But to be empowered as a young person and to know all our history, because when I first went, I wasn't there when it started. I came later, and when I first came, the first thing they handed me was the 1868 treaty, and they said, read this and know this, because this has everything in it that we're about. And so that was my introduction to survival school. And I was like, wow, this is cool, man, you know? And then we traveled all over. We went to the trials, and one of them was here. We came here to Lincoln. So there was a lot of opportunity to express what we cared about. And the people who guided us was my mother and my uncle, They were like, she was like the mom and my uncle was the dad. But, you know, if there was something that needed, like an issue would come up, or we'd be curious about what they're doing, like, how come you're going to Ireland? You know, and then they'd say, okay, let's sit down, we're going to tell you the history of Ireland. Now, what do you guys think? You know, or, you know, they'd say like, well, you know what, there's a struggle, there's a fishing rights struggle on the coast. What do you guys think we should do? You know, so we were given the opportunity to think for ourselves, to figure things out, and to participate. And to be a young person at 14 years old, that was really empowering for me. And it's stayed with me all my life, and it's giving me the courage to stand up. I'm not afraid of anybody, because this is where I'm from.
I think, you know, one thing I would add to that, the survival school stuff used to be a very, very small part of the film. And over the course of cutting, you know, Beth and I kept turning to each other and going, why isn't this in the film more? We love this. And like, nobody knows this story. And we found it was because, like, you know, our outside advisors and outside, like, you know, people who were helping us, like, edit, like, all the feedback we were getting was driving towards, like, those, you know, really major flashpoints in the American Indian movement, like Alcatraz, like Wounded Knee, and people love to hear where Madonna was in relation to that, because, like, you know, proximity to that makes her that much more important. But, you know, those things are amazing because we wanted to uncover, like, the women's perspective of those things, but there's so much that would have been left out, and we felt like a film that didn't add to the historical record in a way that could be picked up by audiences today and spark something, maybe even emulated as a way to do things differently. Because that's the amazing thing, is that I run into so many kids and so many of my contemporaries who, you know, back in Oklahoma and elsewhere, who are just like, what am I even supposed to do? Like, this is, I'm not into what the tribal government's doing. They're not listening to little old me. Like, there's all this infighting. What am I even supposed to do? And I hope by seeing this film, you'll see things like the survival school and see that they had nothing to get that started. Nothing. But it made a massive impact on so many kids who grew up into adults who had the power to make change. And I'm also just sort of like, I'm sorry, but if, like, Madonna Thunderhawk at 75 can, you know, kick these doors down and keep kicking them down, like, you kind of don't have any excuse. So, so that's my hope. And then adding to the historical record is also, I just wanted to mention that clip that you saw about Women of All Red Nations and the uranium mining. That is, like, it's a miracle you guys even saw that right now, because one, most of this archival footage has been long dug out from basements in South Dakota. Like, you go to ABC News and type in Madonna Thunderhawk, forget it. Like, there's nothing comes up because everybody was watching the men. You know, it's almost like when aliens land somewhere and they're like, take me to your leader. News crews landed in South Dakota in the 70s and they were like, take me to your leader. And the leader always looks like what you think a leader is. So they were looking for a guy, you know, and that's who they always filmed. You know, this is something that, like, with the Warren stuff, we were like, this is really important history, but it kept getting kicked out. It was constantly cut from the film. And then it was constant, and then we started putting it back in, and then it was cut for good, and it was gone for like a good 5 months out of the film, because we were like, there's just no time to get all the important stuff in, you know, everything pre-Wounded Knee, and, you know, try to wrap up this movie, and, like, you know, we weren't going to get the Ken Burns treatment of like a 3-night, you know, television series. It doesn't happen to women, actually, but we're working on changing that. But we finally had to reach a point, just as filmmakers, where we said, you know, like, this is important, and even though, like, everybody keeps telling us it doesn't work and it's not working, well, we have to make this work. We all have to stay here today in the edit room until this works, because it's important. And if it's not part of that history, then nobody knows. Like, nobody knows your own history. And this is one of the ways we're trying to, chip away at that little by little. But, I'm just kind of mentioning this because I think when you see a finished film, you never think about the things that aren't in it. And this is something that you could have easily have watched the entire film and you wouldn't have seen that and you wouldn't have known about all the work that the women were doing post-Wounded Knee. So
Thank God for the website that you can have
yes,
the
anything
bonus
that,
features.
If you're mad at us about anything that's not in the final film, go to the website. Lots of stuff there. So, and read the book.
Beth, do you want to introduce the next clip?
Sure. So,
Do you want to use this mic just for fun?
will we? Okay. So, this final clip involves 3 generations of women in Madonna's family, Madonna, Marcy, and Marcy's daughter, Chue Mesta, who's in the audience here. In this clip, we get to see and experience from a very personal perspective the ways in which the destructive nature of boarding school experience has intergenerational effects or historical trauma. And in addition, and just as importantly, the ways in which people take steps, and in this case, Marcy in particular, to decolonize the mind from such an experience. And that's just a word I want to put out there, one that we could talk about in the question and answer. But if we could roll the final clip.
One of the things I do take pride in is taking the time to be with my children and raising them, being actively involved in their lives, because that was something my mom didn't get to do. I've never tried to talk to her about it because I realized that she wasn't raised to be open with her feelings. Mom always tells me that Grandma Faith was not the kind who was gonna hold you and kiss you and tell you that she loved you. Grandma Faith went to boarding school when she was 4, and then she spent her whole 18 years, all those formative years. That's when you learn how to be a parent for your children. There were no loving adults there to teach them how to hug. There was no one. The boarding schools took everything, including those family structures and our ability to parent. So I had to learn how to parent. And I was the one who initiated saying that I love you to my family. I just kept saying it, I love you guys, and, I love you, and pretty soon it became a normal thing. So now we're able to say that. Well, it wasn't never like that,
She's more loving, more emotional. And that's a good thing. Because that cycle was broken by her generation.
No, I don't want to say anything because I'm going to cry. Boarding schools are a big topic of conversation. And when we were at the museum today, we talked about expanding the boarding school exhibit in the First Peoples of the Plains exhibit. And my mom went to boarding school, and it changed her life in amazing ways. More good than bad, but she will still never eat rhubarb in her life because they all had to eat rhubarb. But I just really enjoyed this segment because it shows the generational thing about the boarding schools and how we learn from that and how it's changed our lives forever, tribal people's lives forever. So Madonna, what do you think, what do you see in your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren as far as, the healing that your family has had from this terrible ordeal that has been generational, intergenerational?
Well, I think that's going to be a real important part of our survival as a people into the modern years, modern day, is that a lot of the negative things that happened, that are handed down to generation, are being changing with the younger generations. I see. I'm on Facebook. I love Facebook. So I see a lot of pictures on Facebook, and it's positive things that I look for. I don't dwell on all the negative, and I kind of get tired of the selfie sometime, but it's a modern day thing. So, but a lot of pictures I noticed are of young fathers, native fathers with their children, with their babies. And oh man, that just, really, that just really makes me feel good, because that didn't happen, not in my generation. Those things didn't happen. They were, it was almost like a negative thing if a father was too involved with what went on at home, and child care and all that kind of stuff. But because of this boarding school system, like it started with my grandmother back in the early 1800s, and then her generation, and then my mother. And yeah, she spent year-round in the boarding school system, and when she was in the 30s, when this country was in a depression. My grandmother had left her children there, especially during the summer too, because they got 3 meals a day. So those kinds of things were. And my mother did take care of her siblings who were in the boarding school too, so she stayed. She worked during the summer, but she also looked out for them. But that's where when I was in a boarding school, when I was real young, the late 40s, we all stayed in the first grade till everybody learned how to speak English. Well, by that time, everybody, you learned the sign language. We had our own sign language. Because if you didn't talk good English, you just didn't talk at all. Because you got punished for talking Indian, so you didn't, and people made fun of you if you talked broken English, so you just didn't talk at all. So there was this silent sign language, those types of things. But we learned loyalty, we learned how to get around the system. When I was in high school, I don't think I read any books, but I graduated with all A's. Because I was good with the English language, and the teachers liked that. So I hustled my way through high school. But those are the types of things you learn to do, how to survive in the system. But it was a lot of my generation now, we're the elders now, and we were like that. We didn't have the parenting skills, and we didn't hand it down to a lot of our children, and it's still, with some families, it's the same way. But we were, the American Indian movement, the Red Power movement had a lot in my life and my extended family's life of giving us reality checks, and we had to question why things are the way they are. And back in the day, I remember hearing things like, bumper stickers that would say "question authority," And I thought, what does that mean? I found out what that meant, So, we learned that way, and so so our families are breaking that cycle, and they're learning, and they're healing, and it's sad that it's not across the board with all of our people, but we're getting there. So that cycle's being broken, but it's devastating for our people for generations.
I think, you know, I really dig how this turned out because, and it's all still a work in progress, but there's definitely a version of this movie where, you know, there's a scene, this is one way one could have done it, where there's a scene where we talk about how tough things are for Madonna and Mabel Ann as well in survival school. And there are definitely some really, really awful stories there that are really hard to hear stories, but also stories about like what wonderful sisters they are and a great bond there. But there are a lot of really good films that focus solely on boarding schools. And there's also some really great projects coming out of a Vision Maker focusing on boarding schools, and they've got that covered, and they do that really well. And I just think that like unless you have a space that you're going to really address like the complexities of survival school, it's a difficult thing to just pitch in there. It happens all the time with lots of films, and generally with films who are primarily driven by people who are not from within the community. Because I think there's a problem with that, because I think showing these extreme examples of abuse are easily dismissed because it's just too much to handle. Like most of America can't really accept and understand that America did that. And so it gets dismissed, or it falls into this category where it just feeds this fascination with the horror of it all. And that's not why, you know, Madonna and Marcy and Mabel Ann, that's not why any of us share our stories for that kind of entertainment. So, you know, we decided to treat it this way because often it's like these terrible, terrible things happen in boarding school. And then you're sort of just left to kind of feel like fascinated in this dark way and also just feel sorry for that person. And then there's no connection, really. It also falls into things that happened. And then people who watch films like that who maybe aren't really in our camp kind of go like, I'm still apologizing for that happened like how long ago? But the thing is that, you know, when you tie it all together, that just falls apart because you're showing like this happened and then this kept happening. And then these are the reverberations, step by step, generation by generation, why, you know, this wasn't a one-time event. This wasn't a one-time damage. Like this followed through and it has consequences. And I think learning about those things is pretty vital to understand, you know, the Indian sitting next to you. So that's why you know, this is just one space where we decided to try to approach things differently. And it was tough again because like, you know, funders and people want that like, you know, Madonna cry on camera. Like people really, really want that thing. And it's like,
no.
No.
Ain't gonna happen.
Ain't gonna
That's not. But you know, we hope people get more out of a more nuanced approach like this, so.
We're going to go to questions pretty soon, so if you have any questions, Naomi's doing the mic. Naomi's right here. But Beth, I just wanted to give you the opportunity, well, give you all an opportunity for some parting shots. So, Marcy, why don't you start first?
What am I doing?
No big long expose, but just like, what do you want these people to know about this project?
Wow. Well, first of all, and we touched on it at the beginning. Beth started out wanting to write a book about women of the Red Power movement, and she's done that. And she wanted to, you know, also bring that into film. But for various reasons, it turned out to be a film about mostly me and my mother. But I think it's really important that we remember who the workers were in the movement. The movement wasn't just a bunch of men in the media having these profound speeches. I mean, they did, a lot of them had they were very skilled in leadership. But if it wasn't for the women doing the work, a lot of the work wouldn't have gotten done. So I think that's one of the things that I want to make clear about this film, is that there were many Madonnas during that time, many. And we need to remember them and know that, you know, it wasn't just one family or one woman.
Madonna?
Well, I'd just like to say, first of all, that when I first met Beth back in 1998, prior to that time, I had been approached, I don't know how many times, by people, journalists from all over the world, academics that wanted to write their thesis or whatever, and they'd either, you know, get on the phone, or else they'd show up at the door and then wanted a picture and a short interview, and then they were gone. Those types of things. And my brother at the time, he kind of warned me. He told me, he said, don't be just talking to anybody, because you don't know what these people are going to do. They might be writing something that's, you know, put their take on it, and then your name will be on it. So I was real careful. And at one time, this woman came, and I forget what I was doing, but I think I was cleaning house or something. We were doing something anyway, and I was really busy, and she came and she said, oh, so-and-so recommended that I come and talk to you, and I'm writing this paper for my class, and on and on. So I said, well, all right, you know, it's for your class, okay, for school and all that. Then I forgot about it. And about, I don't know, a year or so later, I get a call from my sister, Mabel Ann, and she says, how come you didn't tell us you were in a book? And I said, what? And she said, yeah, her and my mom were going somewhere. Anyway, they were in, I think, wherever you, in Minneapolis Airport or someplace, and there's a boutique there or something, and a bunch of Indian stuff in there, and they had all these books and pamphlets and stuff, and here was this book, and it was just kind of like one-liners in there on pictures, and there was myself and all other women, the Dan sisters from the Nevada, and different ones, and I thought, this is the woman that came and said she was writing a paper for her class, and she wrote a book and published the pictures, and there it was for sale. So I got burned that time, and I thought, I'm not doing that ever again. And but when Beth came to the door, I thought, and there she was with her gear and her little backpack and stuff, and of course she was just this young, you know. I looked at her and I thought, God, she walked out of the 60s, you know. She had long hair, and she had a backpack, you know, and she's, you know. And I thought, dang, you know, so I told her, come on in, you know. So she came and she hung out, and I just got to know her real good, and she stayed around. And I thought, well, this is for real, you know. Here's somebody who's really, really interested, you know. And I'm so glad I did, because as a result, now she's doing this book, and in that book is it's going to be such a good book, because it's all voices of women, that powerful women back in those days, women that I learned from. And she's got their interviews, and most of them are gone now. So their story's going to be told thanks to her. And so, you know, to me, and the film is going to be real good too. And it's been a while for it, and I was kind of getting worried, because when it first started out, I said, oh, this will be great, you know. I said, but it's not going to be the Madonna show, because I've seen so many other films of these people back in the day, and mostly men, and it's all their story. Like they did everything all by themselves, you know, and they were the leader, and then they're all saying the same thing, And, you know, I was there and I'm thinking like, well, you know, I don't know about that, but, you know. But anyway, so that's why I said this is so important. But as you know, time went by and then I started learning about this whole making a film business, and the people with the bucks, they start telling you what's going to be in there. So then it starts changing. But I trust these two, so I know that in the end it's going to come out good.
Christina, you get 2 lines.
2 lines. Thank you for trusting me.
Yeah. I want to make sure that we have enough time for questions and answers. You could say more than that.
No, that's really good.
Beth? I'm good. Oh, here. You sure?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to hear what everybody is thinking.
Yeah, I just would love to talk more.
Yeah, I would love to talk more with everybody. We saw what we had to say.
So you always got a microphone, so hold your hand up.
Okay, well, I actually have 2 questions. And my first one is directed towards Beth. And I would like to know what it was about Madonna that made you realize I want to make a film about this woman when you were interviewing her. And Madonna, I would like to know if you were hesitant to make a film about yourself, and if you were, what convinced you to do it?
I don't know if there wasn't a moment. It's all a process. I mean, one of the first things that happened when I never became an academic to be an academic. I became an academic because it's the way I could learn the oral histories and the stories and learn about social movements. And I guess I come from the 60s. I do dream most nights about, you know, bell bottoms and that 70s. It's true, it's the 70s that I like the most. But so it was more like with Madonna, it was about finding, you know, a mentor and a friend and a comrade and a colleague and an elder and a whole bunch of other things, and co-conspirator, where we could do work that infiltrates these spaces and be collaborative and break up this unbelievably strong and difficult history where Native people are just research exploitation. And how do we flip that script? So it was really Christina, you know, who brought the idea and the framing for the film. I just wanted to tell all the stories, and, you know, I needed to find a way and work with someone who could tell them in a way where you're compelled to know more. And that's one of the challenges, and I think we're doing that. Madonna?
Well, like Beth said, it didn't start out to be a movie about Madonna. You know, that isn't how it was first talked about and stuff. But over the months, over the years, as it was developing, listening to them talk and listening to how they've had to do things because of the funding. But I also started to realize that how are we going to get the story told? You know, we have to compromise along the way. But that, yeah, I was there. You know, this is what I saw with my own eyes and I heard with my own ears. It's not secondhand. So, yeah, we need to do this so that this history will be there for the coming generations, all the young women that are coming up, you know. So that was the main reason.
So you all were talking about the historical trauma of boarding schools, and this is directed towards Marcy. What are some things that made you realize that that you need to learn how to say I love you to your family, and that was important to kind of emotionally decolonizing, and what was that process like for you?
Well, actually, my older sister helped me through that. When I moved here, I was 24, and my sister lived here, and she was involved in some healing of her own. And it was outside of Native community. And, but it was very healing. I mean, you know, the stuff that she was learning. And so through her teaching and with the women in this community, I first of all, I learned that not everything was my fault. And that's really empowering for a young person to realize that not everything wrong or bad is my fault. And then also realizing that I matter. That was the other thing. Because when you come from a history, and I was in boarding school, so it isn't like way back. I mean, I went, and my brother was one of the ones who would run away, and they would go look for him on horseback and dogs, and you know, so it wasn't way back that was happening. You know, that was something that we experienced as young people. But when you come from an environment where you're told that you're not good, you shouldn't be here, what are you still doing here? And you know, my mother took us on and off the reservation, and in times that we went to white schools, the first thing that they would tell me is go back to where you come from. And I would look at them and I'd be like, you're not even from here, you go home, you know? So it was very confusing, but because I'd be the only Indian person in the whole classroom or in the whole school, what I said didn't matter. What I thought didn't matter. And so you go through, you know, growing up with those messages constantly, you know. But through my older sister and her willingness to break cycles and take me along with her, you know, I really love her for that, because she's the one who took me with her and said, we're going to do this. We're not going to hit our kids anymore. I mean, you know, not anymore, but you know, there was, because of boarding schools, everything that happened in a boarding school, our people learned. So when we were done with boarding school and we started having our own kids, what happened to us, we started doing to our kids. And one of the decisions that we made when we each had our first boy, each of us had a boy first, we made a pact that we were not going to hit. We were not going to hit anymore. And so, then it went on to other things, like we're gonna be in their lives, and we're gonna be loving, and through our whole parenting experience, we would figure out, like Cody would be, you know what, I don't know how to do this. My daughter's acting up and blah blah blah, and I don't know what to do. And we would talk about it, and she would realize at the age that her daughter was, where she was confused about parenting. At that age, that was also the age she wasn't, when her mom wasn't around. So it was, you know, realizations of why are we, you know, why are we like this? So we had each other. And so through that process of self-healing, it was just a natural process to share with our families and our children, so that we break those cycles and keep moving forward. Thank you for that question.
Do you think, just kind of as a follow-up, do you think like survival school gave you that self-empowerment to later in life be able to go, okay, I'm going to work on this? Because I know you guys were left to figure things out on your own. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you felt like that had a connection. Without survival school, maybe you just would have kept doing, you know, the same
Well,
patterns.
I think that survival school gave us a different direction, or a different focus, because you have to remember what was going on during that time. It was a period of uprising nationally, and it was a very political period. So our survival school was focused on knowing the issues of the day and knowing our treaty rights and knowing where we stood as Indian people on the political scene. So that was our focus, and also the revitalization of our spirituality. Those were two big things that survival school gave us.
So this is directed towards Christina, and I really appreciate what you said about not manhandling the story while you had this idea of connections that you wanted to draw between the flooding and not going home and that sort of thing. But you said that some time passed between when you kind of caught onto that drift and when Marcy actually made the comment about it. So how did you shoot purposefully and with a goal without having the goal of making the connection between those two dots?
Right. That's a really good question, because as you know, you can shoot forever and ever and ever, probably. It's really easy to do that. Well, what I did was I just, I had to keep, there are a lot of different threads that you have to keep an eye on, because people are very complicated, and their lives are very complicated, and their motivations are complicated. So you kind of have to have several threads going. So at the risk of getting too masterclass here, I'll just really quickly say that, off the top of my head, I would say, for example, okay, I've spent a little bit of initial time with the family. I would say that Madonna, and this is something you would see in the finished film, Madonna is, kind of racing age. She's extremely active for her age, but that's something that is starting to catch up with her in different ways. So, okay, that's one thread. Marcy is finding her own, and sometimes these would just fall by the wayside and it would not be true, but another thread that was concurrent with this thread you're talking about that kind of had to stay dormant for a while. Another thread would be, Marcy is really, doesn't realize how powerful she is as an activist in her own right, because of always, being compared to Madonna Thunderhawk. So there are probably 10 other threads. So I'm shooting towards all of those, knowing that they will make a story. And a lot of filmmaking is working towards getting those threads to kind of start to come together. But then the harder you work and the more present you are, and then with a little bit of luck, because fortune does favor the brave, right? And the persistent, you also just hope for that gift, that thing, And if you're working filmmaking or studying it, you'll start to see it in other documentaries, where I'll start to see it in friends or even just people I don't even know that well and don't know how the film is made. You can tell that the film was sort of so-so, and then that one thing happened, and we refer to it, amongst colleagues, as just oh my God, they got the gift, which is just, and the gift means to a certain extent, it's kismet, all these things have to align, and you worked so hard, and then it came from heaven that your main character got arrested that day on camera. That thing. So yeah, you can't just be hanging around looking, this isn't wildlife photography where you hang out for 3 weeks to get the cheetah doing the pounce. That ratio Shirley would not allow that shooting ratio. I wouldn't be up here talking about my second film. I would have been, waxing poetic about that one film I made once. So that's how you balance it. You're hedging your bets and you're flowing. It's kind of it's like surfing. The ground is always moving with you, and you've got to follow along with it. The second you try to manhandle it, you're wiping out. You
have a question there, Naomi? Oh.
In what ways would you like to see the school systems today improve, and how are you hoping that this film would impact that, or what values from survival school would you like to see carried on?
I didn't even hear her.
Hey, Marcy, talk about your new school.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
So I would like to see in relation to the current school system, on reservations, I would like to see our people take more initiative to actually control those schools. And it's one of those situations where wherever the money comes, you gotta do what they say, you know, that kind of situation. But if we stood on our treaty rights and our sovereignty, then duh, we should control our own schools, you know. So I think I mean, there's a long history of why classrooms are set up the way they're set up, but also believing in the way, I mean, thinking about how our people used to teach our young people, you know? It was a family effort. It wasn't like you go over there, you know, it's like you go with your auntie, the girls went with their aunties and the boys went with their uncles. And it was a family situation, and they learned everything they needed to learn by a certain age. And then, you know, there's always an expectation, you move from here to here to here to here to here, you know. So I think I would definitely like to see the survival school model be used in some kind of situation. But because, again, of the colonized mind and the effects of you know, colonization through boarding school and all these other methods of, you know, taking our lifestyles away, it would be hard to try to put that into the systems that already exist. So I've always had this idea of, okay, one of these days I'm going to start my own school, you know, and I've been saying that for all my life. And so with the help of my wonderful husband, we have done that. We have most recently just got our nonprofit status for a mobile school. Waniyatu Iyawapi means counting the winters. Mobile school. So we're in the process. We're just now, like she was saying, we're rookies, or I am. And so right now we're looking at curriculum development and funding and trying to get this moving as quickly as possible, because our young people are, I mean, you guys all know the stats, you know, the suicide rates are sky high, the dropout rates are sky high, the unemployment, you know, we could go on and on and on. And how long has that been going on? You know, when are we going to change that? And so it's got to start with our young people. Give them something else to do, to learn, to empower them in a way that they take responsibility of their future. And so that's something we're working on finally. And I'm really excited about that, because I don't want to leave here without doing something for my people. I mean, we used to tease each other, you know, when I used to go to college here, when I was part of Unite, one of the things we would say was, what have you done for your people lately? You know, and be like, I don't know, what should we do? You know, but you know, I don't want to leave without doing something. You know, I have a responsibility, and look at my legacy. You know, I have a responsibility to do something, and that's what I know. So that's what I'm going to do.
Okay, Naomi's got another question. And while she's moving the microphone, I want to thank the Cooper Foundation for funding these ladies' travel to come down here.
I wanted to thank all of you for coming today. Marcy, earlier you said something that really touched home with me. My grandmother's name is Jenny Yankton, and we're from Pine Ridge originally, and we moved here when I was 15. I've never met my real father, my biological father. My mother struggled a lot over the years, but now she's taking care of the family, and my grandmother passed on. But you know, you said that there were a lot of great male leaders that were involved, but the women behind the scenes were the ones that do all the work. Well, the women in my family have kept us alive, kept us together. And in the recent years, I'm starting to get clarity, and I'm starting to work towards success now. But if it wasn't for Jenny Yankton or Phyllis Stone, the women in my life that were behind me and kept pulling me back in every time I would stray and get lost, you know, I was almost like a poisoned wolf out there, just frustrated and confused and, you know, moving through life with no purpose or no direction. And now that I'm sober and healthy, I have a lot of people who are calling on me, and it's really almost intimidating and for me to step forward, you know, and help out. Like, I've been asked to go to the schools, the grade schools here now, and talk to some of the kids. But I keep thinking to myself, well, you know what? I've been living a life to where, like, I don't know how I can be the example for them, but they're like, no, you're the one who's like changed it around now, so we need them to see you. And I had a friend here earlier, and I tried to get him to stay, but he wanted to leave because he didn't feel comfortable, but he's working on being sober, you know. But the thing about it is, it's true, the Native women are the ones who taught me, you know. They're the ones that took the time to tell me how to live, to tell me how to be respectful, to tell me basically these things that helped me survive long enough until I got this clarity now, you know, to stay honorable enough to where I didn't burn all my bridges, you know. And I really appreciate that about both of you, because you remind me of my grandmother, you remind me of Phyllis Stone, you remind me of the women who have struggled to keep me from self-destructing, you know.
Thanks, Leo. Did you have a specific question, or you just wanted to make the comment?
I just wanted to make that comment.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm glad Leo said that, because that's my comment. Just a comment, Shirley. I have no question, actually, but I have a comment. I am so happy, and I totally thank you for bothering to do this, actually, you made this your life's work, to do a film about warrior women. And actually, one of my uncles many years ago when I was sundancing was trying to have me take the Indian name of warrior woman, because there weren't very many women who chose to Sundance when I did. And he thought that made me a warrior. I was right out there with those men. I was doing what they could do. He said, and you were doing it just as well as they are doing it. But this is my Hunka's son, my adopted son, Leo. And I am so thankful that he chose to get up in front of everybody and tell you thank you also. That it was the women that made him straighten out his life, the women that allowed him to lead his good life now. Thank you so much. We chose an inawokie.
Thanks, Phyllis. Uh-oh. You know what? We said we were going to quit at 8 o'clock, and we're late, but we're Indians, right? So, 2 more questions. Right down here. Oh, dear.
Right here, right here, right here, right here, right here, right here.
Good evening. I want to say also to my relatives here, Latite Uda, it's good you're here. Good to see you again. Weebzaha for being here. I want to introduce this young lady sitting next to me. This is Amber New Holy. She is Oglala Lakota, and she wants to ask a question.
What if we do it like a game? Can we guess the first word? Because this is, I mean, I think this is the point that the gentleman up there was making, is that there's not a single step that any of us are taking, whether it's with, you know, trauma, deep problems, stage fright, or self-doubt, that we have to have each other doing it. We have to. The American Indian movement would not have happened with one person at the front. Everybody had to be working, and that's why it was mothers, it was daughters, it was, you know, it was grandkids, it was everybody was doing it. So is the first word directed at Madonna?
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Oh, that's why. I'm terrified of her. Okay. Obviously. Okay. So maybe the first word is Madonna. Madonna, do you think, or Madonna, are you?
Well, I wanted to ask Madonna how I could, since I am 13, on how I would start out as an activist.
Wonderful. Wow. Yeah, I think you just did. Right?
Oh, I think you've got a good start. Especially the person you're sitting by. Good role model. I follow her on Facebook. That's what you do. You surround yourself by good, positive people. But you also know what's important to you and then learn about it. You know, your community, your school, whatever. Whatever it is that's important to you. And then you build on that. Okay? Because we need you.
Peyton, you get the last question.
I just want to say thank you for coming and talking. Very inspirational. I am a senior in Women Gender Studies, and these are my friends from Unite, Becca and Wita, and we're just starting out as being the first in our family, pretty much, to go on to college and stuff like that. And we talk a lot, like Marcy said, like what should we do? What should we do for our community? What should we do for our natives, you know, as students, and us being so far away from our home. Becca is from Kansas, I'm from South Dakota, Vita's from Winnebago. I guess I want to ask, what would you like to see us do at this young of age as activists? What would you like us to start fighting for that you don't see young people doing enough yet?
Good question. Wow. Good question. I'll say something. You know what you guys did when those T-shirts were coming out. I'm sure most of you probably heard about the Indian Center drinking thing at the football games last year, and how the board of directors at the Indian Center decided not to allow drinking. And Georgiana Lee, are you here? George, who's my assistant director, is the one that led that charge to remove drinking from the Indian Center parking lot. And those people that missed that place to party did this horrible thing with this T-shirt of a dream catcher. Instead of feathers, it was beer bottles. And how disrespectful was that? And through social media, and I think, Rebecca, you might have, but I know all you guys were involved in posting that and calling people out and telling people that this is not appropriate. And I think that that's so important, because I think a lot of racism isn't really racism, it's just ignorance. That they just don't understand the culture, they don't understand we're still here, and that we're alive, and we matter, and our histories are important to us. And so that kind of stuff is you go girls.
So I think I'm just going to just once more, on behalf of the audience, Madonna, Marcy, thank you for sharing your stories, your families for sharing theirs. Beth, Christina, your passion for your community and for bringing these stories to life is so amazing and inspirational in its own right. And Shirley, you did an awesome job moderating. That was awesome. Give them a round of applause, please.